In the ancient biblical narrative, there is a recurring ironclad promise. A supreme divine power offers the ultimate guarantee. Heaven will fight on behalf of the nation. The people are told they don't need to lift a finger, just hold their peace, and the Creator will handle the enemy with absolute miracles. We usually remember the famous story of the 12 spies sent to scout the land of Canaan. 2 came back with blind optimism, while the other 10, the ones history remembers as cowards and villains, warned that entering the land would be a disaster. But those 10 scouts didn't lie. Their actual crime was absolute, sobering realism. They looked at the situation on the ground and refused to buy into the illusion of an invincible divine shield. They reported exactly what was there: a harsh environment populated by powerful forces. They knew any conflict would be brutal, and they understood that betting the survival of an entire people on a promised miracle was a fatal miscalculation. The system's response was swift and brutal. The whistleblowers were wiped out in a plague. The surviving leaders, Joshua and Caleb, were the ones willing to sell the comforting fantasy that the conquest would be cost-free. The foundational mythos of the nation was built right there, on the graves of the 10 people who told the truth. To keep the theological dream alive, uncomfortable realities had to be completely buried. If we treat that ancient promise like a contract, we now have a 3,300-year dataset to audit its performance. We can measure the guarantee of divine protection against recorded history. This timeline maps out that historical reality. The flat line at the bottom shows the promised divine intervention, while these massive spikes represent mass national tragedies, 2 millennia of brutal exile, inquisitions, and ultimately the Holocaust. The disconnect is absolute. This sustained absence of the promised protection led the prophet Isaiah to a chilling observation. When the data showed centuries of slaughter instead of safety, the protector appeared to have inverted. In Isaiah's own words, the divine power turned into an enemy and fought against them. For centuries, scholars have tried to explain away this failure using something called theodicy, which is simply a philosophical attempt to justify why a supposedly all-powerful, perfectly good creator allows horrific suffering to happen. You might be able to use those philosophical gymnastics to explain why one specific tragic event happens to an individual, but applied to the systematic eradication of millions of men, women, and children, the old theological excuses become an insulting farce. The historical record vindicates those 10 ancient spies completely. The cosmic contract was a draconian double-or-nothing trap, rigged so the human side would always take the blame when the system inevitably failed them. There's a famous story in the Talmud that captures the exact moment this logic breaks down. The Creator pulls Moses forward in time to see the future of his people. Moses ends up witnessing Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest scholars in history, being brutally tortured to death by the Romans. Moses is completely shattered. He demands an answer from heaven, asking the only logical question left: is this the reward for a life of absolute devotion? He gets no philosophical explanation, no comfort. Instead, the Creator delivers a single terrifying command: shut up, for thus I have decreed. This command to be silent is the only response the system has left when its internal logic finally breaks. Facing the literal skin of a martyr being weighed in a market, there is no theological justification that holds up, only an authoritarian decree to stop asking questions. When a system's explanations collapse completely under the weight of national tragedy, the only mechanism remaining to sustain the illusion is the deliberate suppression of the human mind. Fast forward to the present day. The people have returned to the physical land, but the ancient divine contract remains exposed for the hollow promise it always was. The miracles never arrived, so a new human substitute had to be engineered to fill that massive void. National survival isn't secured by quiet prayers anymore. It is paid for in the gritty, muddy battlefield, funded by an 18-year-old drafted army. We've traded the ancient fantasy of a painless, heaven-sent victory for a harsh modern truth, an endless, punishing loop of existential warfare. The grim irony here is that the physical reality of today proves the ancient whistleblowers in the desert were right all along. It is a land that consumes its inhabitants. What was sold as the greatest blessing in history revealed itself to be a heavy, merciless burden, a price far too steep for ordinary humans to carry. Ultimately, the tragedy of the Promised Land is the realization that maintaining its foundational illusion requires the perpetual physical sacrifice of its own children on the front lines.